Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our Constitution Day events, which we are going to be celebrating all week long. These events are brought to you by Maricopa Community College's Center for Excellence in Inclusive Democracy, where we focus on civic engagement and democracy, and the great civic engagement staff at our colleges. And I want to give a special shout out and thank you to the folks at MCLI for providing fabulous technical support. We couldn't do it without them. Just a reminder that all events this week are nonpartisan. Our goal is to provide you with factual information so that you can make your own educated decisions when you vote, but also how to be well-informed and engaged individuals in your own community. And that really is one of the goals here at Maricopa, not just to prepare students to transfer to a university or get a job, as important as those functions are. Part of our mission is also to make sure that you are fully engaged community members with the skill set to make well-informed decisions as you go about your civic life. So today is Monday, September 12th, and we're kicking off our week by looking at the propositions that you will see on the ballot this November. Arizona has had a history of very lengthy ballots, in part because of the number of propositions. And what we often hear from students and community members is that the language can be confusing. So like, what does my yes vote really do? What does my no vote really do? How do I decipher the difference? So to help us understand the propositions on this year's ballot is Paul Bentz, award-winning pollster with High Ground Public Affairs Consultants. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us today. And I'd like to ask you to share just a little bit about your own background. Like, did you grow up wanting to be a pollster, and what does a pollster do?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for being engaged in political dialogue, particularly on a Monday. I know it's definitely hard to get back into the groove sometimes after a long weekend. I grew up here in the Valley, and for a long time, I actually thought I wanted to be a math teacher. And then I got a little bit involved in politics, and I realized how much math there was involved in understanding sort of voter turnout, understanding polling, and I sort of used my love of math in a slightly different way than I originally thought. And so when I got into it, I realized there is quite a bit of numbers involved in this. One of the most is all these proposition numbers. So I got it was an opportunity, and I really appreciate Deanna and her team inviting me here today to talk a little bit about the ballot propositions and what yes and no means. And I'm going to this will be the riskiest part of the entire presentation here, which is when I share my screen. So just give me 1 second here, and then I should be good at this point to present from here on. Can you see me okay? Fantastic.
You are looking good, Paul.
Okay.
Thank you.
So one of the things to bear in mind, I think that's really important, is that Arizona has a long history of the initiative and referendum process. In fact, it's been a part of the state of Arizona since our statehood. It was a part of our original constitution and was an essential part. It was actually a very big and extensive discussion that at the time in the early 1900s, a lot of states didn't have that power. And as Arizona being a populous state, it being the last state to join the continental US, there were some very interesting things that had come about that really wanted to be codified in our Constitution. And two of them was the citizens' right to the initiative and referendum. The initiative being able to put issues on the ballot themselves, and referendum being able to take one of the legislative actions and refer it. So we'll talk a little bit about those first, but I think I always like to start all of this with the importance of voting. It is essential that you vote in this upcoming election. I'm sure this is a theme you will hear multiple times throughout the course of the campaign, but you have a month, basically 1 month from yesterday, to register to vote, to participate in this upcoming election. The day after that, early voting will start on October 12th. Every day from then on is election day. Some people will be voting their ballots then. Some people will take a little bit more time. The last possible day to request a vote by mail is October 28th. And then finally, the last recommended day to mail your ballot is November 1st. After that day, you should take it to one of the voting centers and drop it off there, or there'll be many voting centers open sort of that week. I know Recorder Rich is going to talk to you later in the month or later in the week, and he can give you a lot more information there. So just always got to plug the importance of voting, especially when we're talking about this type of issue where it's the propositions sometimes get lost because the candidates and others really flood the airwaves. So we'll talk a little bit about that and then remind you some stuff at the end. So first thing to bear in mind is that what are the different types of issues that can be on the ballot? I mentioned one already, which is the legislative referral. These are the issues that are placed on the ballot by the legislature themselves, often in the realm of like a tax increase or something else that they'd like to get citizen input on that. These ones are, the yes vote has the effect of passing the law, and the no vote has the effect of retaining the current law. So no means status quo in this case, and yes means pass the law. This is where I think people get confused sometimes, because a referendum is slightly different, where you've got an issue passed by the legislature, and then the citizens, for whatever reason, wanted to have an opportunity to speak out against an issue passed by the legislature. Proposition 305 from last cycle is a great example, which was the voucher referral, where Save Our Schools, the voucher expansion had been approved by the legislature. They collected signatures to refer it to the ballot, and then it was on for a vote of the people. We're seeing a very similar issue on another school voucher law this time. That one's different because in this case, what you're saying is yes, keep what was there. The yes has the effect of affirming the legislative action, and then no in this case means don't let the law go into effect. So that's where it kind of gets confusing, I think, for most folks, is the citizens put something on the ballot that they didn't like, and then they have to, instead of saying, you don't say, yes, I don't like it, you say, no, get rid of it. And so that can be a little bit confusing to folks. And this is the one that I think, I hear the most when people say, well, no means yes and yes means no. It's generally when it comes to a referendum. The legislative referral is generally a little bit easier to understand. Yes means it goes into effect, and no means you maintain the status quo. The third one that I did spend a little bit of time talking about is the citizens initiative, the power of the citizens to be able to place an issue on the ballot, collect signatures from the average voters, and then place an issue on the ballot. This is something that has been around, as I mentioned, since statehood, but it has definitely been used at a much more significant amount, probably in the past dozen years or so. We saw this is what Invest in Ed was, which was the temporary, or which was the income tax to put towards education. This is what we see on some of these other ones, like minimum wage was ended up being done that way as well. And what really we see the citizens initiatives try to take care of, or at least address, are the issues that have been placed or that have not been addressed either at the legislative body or by our statewide leadership to the satisfaction of some folks. It was used as a tool originally to empower regular citizens to be able to have their voice heard on these issues. I'd say, this is not really editorial, but you do see more groups and organizations gathering them at this point. Because it takes nearly 300,000 signatures to place an issue on the ballot. And then so really, it's really difficult. I mean, we have seen individuals do that before, but really it generally takes money and a lot of manpower to collect that number of signatures in a period of time. The big question that I get a lot is, what do those pesky ballot numbers mean? They all just, it's a jumble of numbers. I never know what they mean. Well, here's a secret. If you walk away with one fun fact today to share with your friends, at least I think it's a fun fact, is this is what the ballot propositions mean. If it's 100 level, so we've got 128 and 129, for example, coming up, those are changes to the Arizona Constitution, which means the actual document that was that governs the state at the constitutional level. These will be changes to that. These are generally larger changes that, something is currently unconstitutional. This will make it constitutional. The 200 level, which we've seen in the past, 200 and 202, for example, if you remember, been around for a while, the tribal gaming initiatives, others, they're at the 200 level. Those are reserved for citizens initiatives. What you'll see, we've got a couple of those regarding medical debt, as well as the one regarding dark money in this upcoming election. The 300 level are the legislative referendums. These are law changes placed by the legislature onto the ballot that you'll get to vote on. And they generally, a lot of those, they could sometimes pass them themselves, or if they're unable to get to the 2/3 requirement for a tax issue or something like that, what they'll do instead is place it on the ballot for the voters to decide. Legislative referendums, the other reason to do that is that they don't have to go to the governor's desk for an approval or veto by the governor. They go straight past the governor's desk to a direct vote of the people. Prop 400 level are local issues like municipal bonds, overrides, countywide issues, transportation items. You'll see those often have the 400 level, and you get issued a ballot proposition number by the county, and then they count up. So like in 411 can be in one community, 449 can be in another. They do issue those sequentially. We will have to go over. Several years back, they actually started counting up, because if you remember, there used to be just lots of Prop 301s, 302s, 303s, and then it gets sort of mixed up. Which Prop 202 are we talking about here? So instead, the numbers now count up, but because we have such a lot of local issues within the county, sometimes what we actually will see is that we'll run through the numbers fairly quickly. Some other cities will have like questions as well. Many of the municipalities, in addition to a Prop 400 level number, will have local funding issues that come across as ballot questions, questions 1, 2, 3, etc. So we'll start first talking about the constitutional initiatives and what they have. There are 5 in this case, and overall we've got 10 statewide issues on the ballot this time around. Quite a few, especially if you don't if you're busy, which I'm sure you are as students and others, to take the time to go through all of these. On the Secretary of State's website at azsos.gov, you can read the actual ballot language for any one of these propositions. And they also have what they call a publicity pamphlet. And that can give you a listing of the people who submitted letters in support of the proposition, as well as letters in opposition. It's a great opportunity to go through and kind of see who's aligned and what folks are backing an issue, and what folks maybe are opposed to an issue, to give you an idea of what sort of maybe the goal is, or maybe who was backing it to originally. Prop 128 is a change to the Voter Protection Act. Prior to the early 1990s, basically what would happen is these citizens would pass an initiative, they place it on the ballot, and then the legislature would go in and change it. And this happened originally with the passage of marijuana. Basically, there was late 90s, there was actually a citizens initiative to legalize medical marijuana. The legislature came in and gutted the initiative and basically threw it out after it had passed by a vote of the people. The result of that is they placed an issue on the ballot called the Voter Protection Act. And basically what that means is that the legislature cannot change an issue that was voted on by the people, but for a 3/4 vote, and only if it is furthering the goal of the issue. And so that's why we've seen things like Clean Elections Act. You've seen First Things First. There's a lot of other local and statewide issues that have been placed on the ballot that the legislature can't then touch because they're voter protected. That's a phrase you may hear from time to time. What this is a goal by the legislature here to make some changes that if an issue that's placed on the ballot is found to contain illegal or unconstitutional language, that they could then supersede or amend and divert funds from a local issue. This is to create a little bit of flexibility from the legislature to give them some power back on what the Voter Protection Act is, which is pretty stringent at this point. On the other hand, what we do find is that there's questions about if they found some small part. There's a severability clause in most of these proposals, which means that they could survive even a little part being knocked off. But that raises the question in this case, would this then invoke the ability to change the Voter Protection Act? So a yes vote in this case lets the legislature change an issue, and a no keeps our current status quo when it comes to the Voter Protection Act. Prop 129 is about a single subject requirement. If you make a change to the Constitution right now, you are required to only address one issue. If you do a citizens initiative right now, you can change multiple things at once. There was, for example, one about changing some voting requirements that also had a property tax in it, that also had some other changes to the law. You're not limited. As long as you put all the language in there, you can go to different sections of state law and change a few things around at once. They're trying to limit that by making each one of these issues a single subject that is expressed in the title of the initiative. And so this is an ongoing effort by the legislature and others to limit the breadth and depth of what initiatives can do. Another one that they more recently passed was strict compliance. It used to only be required for referendum, and strict compliance means every I is dotted, every T is dotted, every voter signature is exactly on the line, and you have to have everything in perfect order in order to qualify for the ballot. Prior to that, initiatives required substantial compliance, which generally meant that as long as the intention was clear, and maybe if there's a few things mixed up, it wouldn't throw everything off the ballot. So that was one that was passed more recently. This is to take it a step further so that if you're voting on an item right now, it only can be in one section of the law, and so that it definitely limits what the initiatives can and can't do at that level. Prop 130 is a constitutional property tax cleanup. The property taxes are part of the Constitution. This is a consolidation. This was a bipartisan effort from folks to bring some sections together and make it a little bit more clear, particularly with exemptions for veterans with disabilities, widows, and other groups, based on some residency requirements that were probably a little bit out of date, and changing that. So that would, a yes vote in this case would consolidate those measures. A no vote in this case would retain the existing law. We have two more constitutional. This is probably one that you've wondered about for quite a while, especially if you've ever, historically, the order of succession in the state of Arizona is if the governor has to resign or something happens to the governor, the Secretary of State is second in line and has been. That's just the order here. And over the last 40 years, it's happened quite a bit. In fact, Governor Ducey is going to be the first individual, it would appear, to both enter and leave the governor's office after 8 years under what we consider normal circumstances. Governor Brewer before him was appointed or succeeded Governor Napolitano when she left to join the Obama administration. Governor Napolitano had been elected, but Hull following her became governor when Symington left office. We see it happen over and over again, all the way back to Meekum and before that. So this is an actual one where the idea is that the governor would then be able to have a joint ticket with somebody that would be considered the lieutenant governor. And the lieutenant governor and the governor candidate would be put up to vote together as a joint ticket in order to avoid like what we saw in 2009, which is a Democrat left office, Napolitano, and a Republican took over because that was Secretary of State. It could happen again right now without a change to our Constitution. This issue's been up before with not a great deal of success, but the idea is that these would be a joint ticket, and then the lieutenant governor would also be considered the head of the I believe it's the Department of Administration. The rest of the line of succession would follow on as it is now, which would mean the Secretary of State would then be third in line, and then I believe Attorney General would be fourth in line, and then treasurers after that. And so that's sort of the line of succession right now. This basically just opens it up and puts a second person at the top of the ticket. So it would be a joint like you see with president and vice president. A supermajority to vote to require ballot measures to approve taxes. Like the single subject rule right now, in order for any sort of tax measure that's referred to the ballot by the public, it only requires a 50% plus one vote. That just means if it passes with a simple majority right now, it becomes the law of the land, voter protected. Back to those other two connections here. This is an effort that if you were to put a issue on the ballot that had a tax associated with it, it would require a 60% vote from the public. So even if you passed with 55% or 57%, if you didn't reach that 60% threshold, you wouldn't. It would not become law if it had a tax associated with it. This certainly appears to be aimed at some of the local tax increases we've seen over the last few years that have been placed on the ballot through Citizens Initiative to make that threshold even higher in order for a tax burden to be associated with them. On to the 200s. 200s are Citizens Initiatives. That's right. I know you guys know that now. These are the two issues. There were multiple things that were out collecting signatures. A couple of other ones filed signatures, but at the end of the day, following a test of those signatures, following legal challenges, and following some of the other items that we see, at the end of the day, there were 2 items that qualified for the ballot. Proposition 209, which is the Predatory Debt Collection Act, and Proposition 211, which is the Voters' Right to Know Act. The Predatory Debt Collection Act reduces the maximum rates on medical debt from 10% down to 3%, and has some other exemptions on there when it comes to garnishment of wages and other items. This has been put out by a group called Healthcare Rising, who is looking to try to reduce some of the burdens on healthcare issues. This has certainly been a challenge that I think that we've seen, that it's basically a battle between some of the healthcare groups and some of the healthcare providers being played out on a statewide level. 211, this is the Voters' Right to Know Act. This is also known as, dark money. And the idea is that this is the 4th time that Terry Goddard and others have attempted to put this on the ballot. He has finally been successful in qualifying for the ballot. Basically, what this would require is any individual spending over $50,000 on a statewide campaign or $25,000 on any sort of local campaign has to disclose the original donor of anybody who gave more than $5,000. And it adds additional recording requirements. And the original donor is one of those things to bear in mind, because I think I hear this a lot in politics as people are sort of fed up with saying, well, they gave it to this guy who gave it to this group who then gave it to this thing. And that's how we ended up with like Citizens for Responsible Voting. And you're like, who's that group? Who's behind them? The idea here is that this would get to the original source of these funders to prevent them from trying to either pass it through an organization or at least increasing the transparency so that we know who's funding the outcome of our elections. A similar issue in the city of Tempe passed with over 90% of the vote, and one in the city of Phoenix passed with over 80% of the vote. Individuals did try to get this one removed from the ballot via a legal challenge, which was not successful. So this one will be on the ballot in November. And I do suspect, I won't opine on the rest of these, but I do think this one's going to pass. Based on all of the polling I've ever done on dark money, I think 211 has got a strong likelihood of passage on the upcoming vote. The final 3 issues that we'll go through today these are the referendum ones. These are the ones passed by the legislature and placed on the ballot for the individuals. Proposition 308 is a change for in-state tuition for non-citizen residents. If you're a student in the state of Arizona, this is aimed at mostly Dreamers, but regardless of your immigration status, if you graduated and attended a public school or a school for 2 years in Arizona, you would be eligible for in-state tuition and other financial aid. The reason this one was placed on the ballot, and this was actually placed on the ballot over a year ago, is that this is a change to a previously passed limitation of state benefits for those who do not have legal citizen status. So basically, this is allowing in-state tuition to students who maybe came here for no fault of their own and would like to receive the same benefits if they were part of our community and have gone to school here, to be able to go on to participate here. This one has received a lot of bipartisan support from both Democratic-leaning groups as well as Republican-leaning groups and businesses. Another thing to note here is this is aimed at allowing students to not want to leave the state to attend university. We have a lot of talented students who would like to stay here in state, and this is the goal there is to give them that opportunity within giving them the same rights as some of these students who are from here. The Prop 309 is a voter ID requirements for mail-in ballots and in-person voting. Right now, if you vote early, you put your information on the outside of the thing. You sign that affidavit that swears and affirms that you are who you say you are, and then you can mail it back in. What this one would do is require you to take the additional step of providing your birth date, your government issue ID number, and putting that in an affidavit within your ballot. And then if you dropped it off at a polling place, you would also require photo ID to put that. It's an extra step compared to what we've done now. The yes vote in this case would require that, so that early voting from here on out would need these identification requirements. The no vote in this case maintains the current early voting. So if you vote no on this one, early voting stays the way it is right now. If you vote yes on this one, you would have to provide your identification on future early voting pamphlets. And I'm not clear on if this one would be an extra card or a flap on the envelope or something like that. But ultimately, in this case, it would, again, back to what no means in these cases, voting no means that the current law stays into effect. And then the final one that I will talk a little bit about on the statewide side is Proposition 310. This is a temporary 1/10 of a cent sales tax to benefit fire districts, which serve a lot of rural communities throughout the state. If you travel to Flagstaff, if you travel up to the White Mountains, if you go out to San Diego, if you leave any of the metro regions and drive on any of our major freeways, the odds are you're being served by a fire district. And fire districts actually do the local firefighting and the local emergency response, but they're also in charge of responding to major accidents along the freeway, some of the most dangerous freeway stretches in the state. They've been asking for a while to receive additional funding to help do that job, because while they do serve a certain resident tax base and do have the ability to do a taxing district based on property tax limitations, some of these groups, despite serving smaller populations, have a very large public safety need to serve some of these more busy thoroughfares. So this is a temporary sales tax to help fund those issues. A yes vote would pass the sales tax, which means our overall sales tax rate statewide will go up 1/10. So if it is 8.3 now, it would go to 8.4 on the statewide sales tax. If you vote no on this, it would maintain the current sales tax, but then the district wouldn't receive the funding money that they receive. So that was a lot. That's 10 statewide issues that are on the ballot, and they're likely to be listed out, all together here. So I have to say, one thing that really is important is that there will also likely be, especially since most of you live in Maricopa County, these are just the local school issues alone that are on the ballot in this November. I tried to do the city ones as well. They were a little bit harder to collect up in a way like this, but just bear this in mind that this is going to be a two-sided ballot. I know you've got folks coming to talk about the importance of talking about judgeship and other important ballot issues, but one thing to note is that there are a lot of local school elections here that they're seeking a continuation of their override. They might be seeking a bond to build new facilities. And bear in mind that we traditionally see somewhere between 20 and 25% fall off, where about a big chunk of the folks they'll vote for governor, they'll vote for Senate, and then they'll trail off as they get down the ticket. So taking the time to get to the bottom of the ballot, get to the back of the ballot, and vote on these local issues is critically important. And in this case, one thing I always like to say is override is an important phrase that does not mean that these school districts have overspent their budget or that they're somehow needing money because they're out of money. What an override is like some of these other constitutional issues that we talked about previously. In 1980, they put a revenue control limit in the Constitution that limited, based on a formula, how much schools could spend. That formula is still in place despite it being 1980, and things have changed a little bit since 1980. If a district wants to exceed that, they have to get a vote of the public, again, a constitutional requirement, to get their continuation revenue. So otherwise, they last for 7 years, and then it has to stair step down. So that's my little PSA for today. An override doesn't mean that the district has run out of money or that they've been spending wildly. It's the permission that they need locally in order to continue to provide local funding for the schools. Your city and town, they might have some local issues on the ballot as well. A bond issue regarding building maybe police and fire stations or improving streets, other local public safety things. Just bear in mind, it's worth looking at and researching further and taking the time to get through all of that. So I know that's a lot of information. It's really important to take the time to do the research and know what's on your ballot. And don't be afraid to Google, look something up and what does this mean and exactly what does it do? And so just a friendly reminder, if it's not a referendum, besides those, Yes means yes. Yes means let that ballot pass. And then no means keep where we are now. It means that we don't want to do this issue, and that we're just going to keep the law as it is. The referendum is the only one. It's like, yes, let the legislature pass what they have, or no, in that case, means we don't want to do what the legislature did. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and turn it back over to Deanna.
Thank you so much, Paul. As you can see, 10 ballot propositions, and that again is in addition to all of those local issues that will be decided. We really recommend that you come prepared with a plan to vote. And I run into a lot of students and even community members who think they can just walk in and take one look at it for the first time and figure it all out. I would not recommend that strategy. So if you go on to the Secretary of State's website, if you go on to if you live in Maricopa County, go on to Maricopa County election site, you can actually look to see what your ballot is going to include. Depending on what local community you live in, what local races, you will be able to see everything that you will have to decide on so that you can go in well informed, make some decisions ahead of time. I even have gone in when we've had these huge long lists. I make my little notes and I go in with my cheat sheet so that I know exactly how to fill it out and I'm not taking up too much time. So again, our goal is to make sure that you have the tools so that you can be well-informed voters. So Secretary of State, Maricopa County elections, great resources. Paul, we did have a couple of questions though I'll ask you to talk about. One, what would be the lieutenant governor? Is this person going to be just window dressing, or would they have like a real job while they're hanging around just in case something happens?
No, so that's a great question. From what I understand, that the local government would, the lieutenant governor would be the head of the Department of Administration, and so that is an executive job right now. Right now, it's a pretty high up job in the governor's administration. Every department, if you look at throughout state government, they generally have a department head or a leader that's in charge of it. The Department of Administration is the largest department in the state. So they would have actual day-to-day operation jobs that they would be in charge of and people who would report to them. Right now, that head reports to the governor. And so that would be sort of that same sort of level there. They're not just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, hoping something happens. They would have a pretty active role. You know, I mean, just like how the vice president does have duties that they are responsible for in this case, that would be what the lieutenant governor would do.
Great, thanks for that clarification. Another question that came in, can people donate now in secret? So there's no requirement now. You can donate to whatever campaigns you want without having your name attached to anything. Is that the current status quo?
That's a great question. So I should have been a little bit more clear about this. So right now, if you donate to a candidate, if you donate more than $50 to a candidate right now, they're required to ask you for your name, your occupation, and your address and employer, and you have to give that information to them. So right now, when you donate directly to a candidate campaign, it's all transparent. We know who donates to the individuals. Where it runs into is these outside organizations, 501c4s, that come along, and they will come set up shop, and then they put out their own ads. You see them, they've got the really positive sounding name, Citizens for a Better Government, or, you know, the Free Enterprise Club, or Club for Growth, or any number of those organizations. And what they can do is they can accept money from anywhere, and it doesn't need to be disclosed. They can receive corporate contributions, they can receive whatever, and we've seen that grow pretty significantly since about 2014. If you recall, in that election, there was a certain energy provider who spent quite a bit of money influencing the outcome of that election. And since then, we've seen other groups do it as well. And the question is always, who is this money come from? We have suspicions, but we don't know. And so they're not giving money directly to a candidate, but they'll say like, so-and-so is a good person, or so-and-so is a bad person, paid for by Citizens for a Great Day. And, you know, we'll just never know. So the goal here is that if you're going to spend money to influence the outcome of the election, we should know who you are. And that's where that dark money comes from. That if you want to get an idea of kind of what dark money is, that's the great topic to look up. It's sort of this undisclosed campaign contributions that tend to be used to influence the outcome of the election. And there's small groups that somehow magically have lots of money to say things, and that's what they're trying to figure out, is where that money comes from.
Great. So right now you can give to an individual candidate and you have to disclose. You give to one of these groups to do with what they want, then you don't have to.
Right.
That's sort of the distinction. Okay, great. Down ballot. Someone was asking, what does down ballot mean? So is that all the stuff that you'll see down at the end of the ballot? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So that's a great, I sometimes say things and don't even realize that they're like industry speak anymore. So the top of the ticket, or at the top of the ballot, right, the first thing you will see is the United States Senate race. And then generally you will see either your congressional race next after that. The federal offices are at the top of the ballot. And then you will see the governor's race and all the statewide elections. Each ballot, as Deanna mentioned, is customized for you. They've got these different pieces that come in, and they basically like the little Lego blocks that they'll put in together and build you your ballot. And so each precinct, each area has a slightly different setup. But what we do find is, in general, certain things make it to the front or make it near the top, right? And then other things will make it towards the bottom, or they'll be left onto the back. The judgeships, for example, are generally on the back. Local races, things like that, city council and whatever, because there's less communities that have those things, they kind of go commonality first, and then the more rare, the smaller subsections, the further down you go. And so we call those down ballot races. They generally are something that's maybe not less known, or it's less common. And so the communities will have less of that. So we always try to draw attention to that to ensure that people know to take the time. In fact, what we often say is start with the back first. Go to the bottom and work your way up, because you're more likely to know what you're going to do at the top of the ticket than you are at the bottom. And you don't want to get worn out, right? You got to start with, in this case, it's one permission to start with dessert. Go to the end, start with the dessert, and then you can go back and do the appetizers and the salad at the end, because it's really a lot of your really local issues will be at the end here. So that's why we it's basically like sort of a catch-all to say, if I don't know where it is going to be on your ballot, I'll generally say down ballot, because it'll be somewhere near the end.
Great explanation. I appreciate that. In terms of just the importance of voting and knowing what's on the ballot, what would you like to reemphasize for our students and community members listening in? We know that there's a lot of issues. We know we want everyone to vote on everything, but sort of the importance of making sure that everything on your ballot is covered.
Sure, and I didn't do my voter turnout presentation, and I'm sure other folks will talk about it today, but there are over 4.3 million voters in the state of Arizona. We will see voter turnout at about 60%. That means only 6 out of every 10 voters will actually participate in this election. That means 40% will stay home. So number one, first thing is taking the time to vote is essential, because not everybody does that. So first of all, make sure you take the time to vote. That's number one. And then number two is when you're looking at the issues here, almost everybody's going to vote for the Senate race. Almost everybody's going to vote for the governor's race. Those issues that a lot of people are paying attention to, those folks are really going to vote, and we'll see them. Where you'll see the more fall off is if people don't know, or if they're confused, they generally do one of two things. They will either vote no, or they'll skip it altogether. So that if there's something you're passionate about, if there's something you really saw that we talked about here that you were like, oh, that has to pass, that's the one to draw attention to. Because I watched the Cardinals game. I didn't see any ballot proposition commercials. I did see some candidate commercials. Our airwaves are flooded with commercials right now, but there is not enough airwaves to go around for everybody to help tell their story. And so if there's one that you're passionate about, I recommend you take that on and spend the next bit of time going around and talking to people about it. Try to get involved. Most of these races will have some sort of campaign associated with it. I'm sure they would love your willingness to help if you were to reach out to them and say, what can I do? Write a local letter to the editor, share your post on social media. Those are, go knock on your neighbor's doors and encourage them to vote yes. See if you can request a yard sign. Those are all ways that you can demonstrate support that is really desperately needed, because the attention really starts at the top and kind of flows downward, just like the ballot does. And so find those 1 or 2 items and then go help spread the word about them.
Great suggestions, Paul. Again, later this week, we're going to talk about how we want more than your vote. We want you to be active, engaged citizens on whatever issues you choose, whatever stance you choose to make, but at least you're actively engaged in your community. Paul, we had another question. Someone asked if we knew when the publicity pamphlets or sample ballots will be available. Is there a particular time frame that those are typically made available?
Yeah, soon. I don't. So it's generally right around now. It's about a month before early voting. There is a statutory requirement of what items go out when. So when you see that thick gray black and white booklet come in the mail, that's that publicity pamphlet. It's mailed to every voter. It's got all of those letters of support that I mentioned in there. It's a worthwhile read to go through and see where those folks line up and what they're supporting for, and taking the time to look at that. When you learn about judges, there is also a judicial performance review website that you can go on and has rankings and performance evaluations of every single judge. So using some of those online resources to do that. I'm also going to give a plug for one of your future speakers. Mark your calendar. Listen to the Clean Elections presentation when they come. They're hosting tremendous debates for all of the candidates. They also have built a pretty great resource website that's got a lot of the ballot issues on there, a lot of local issues, and points you in the right direction. It's a pretty easy navigation to look through and get some helpful information about what's on the ballot. There's a great lot of resources out there that you can use so that you can be ready to vote this November.
Thanks for plugging Clean Elections. They're great partners with us, as you are, Paul. So thanks for giving them some love. We had a question regarding the property tax. So this question reads, I see in Prop 130 that removing the constitutional determinations as to the amounts of certain property tax exemptions, leaving the legislature to prescribe by law the qualifications for and amounts of property tax exemption it creates. The question is, will this interact with the tax increase proposition, making it nearly impossible to increase taxes to keep up with inflation?
That is a great question that is well researched and beyond my ability. I don't know the intention of I know that the tax rates have been codified in the Constitution and that the goal was to eliminate that. I don't know how it interacts with the new tax changes, and if that's one of the goals. I quite frankly, I'm a pollster, but not a tax attorney, so I don't know the answer to that one. But it does bring up a good point. It's okay to say I don't know. Sometimes when we do that, I know quite a bit about some stuff, but not everything about everything. That's a great question. I'll try to get to the bottom of and see if my folks can answer. And if I do, I'll share it around to the group and let you know. That's a good question that I don't really know at this point.
Fair enough. Thank you, Paul, for that. And hasn't it been the case that in the past that some measures that are approved do end up in the courts to clarify exactly what was meant and the challenges involved with that? So sometimes it is not as clearly laid out as we would like to think.
Right. We don't have anything competing. It gets really interesting is we do have historic precedent that if 2 issues are addressing the same item and they're competing, then whatever got the highest vote getter supersedes the other one. So you can actually have sort of like a Frankenstein. Like if you had 2 issues regarding the same topic, you could have different parts of the law passed that merge together, which creates a lot of complications.
Just imagine so. Well, thank you, Paul. We have addressed all of the questions that have come in. We appreciate you being here with us today, giving us a little primer on all those propositions. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise. Students, community members logging in, thanks for sharing your time with us today. Remember, you can tune in all week long, 11 o'clock. We will have topics every single day this week as we lead up to Constitution Day. And again, make sure to make your plan to vote. Don't go in thinking you can read it all at once. Make sure that you use those resources and come up with a good plan. So thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and let you log off. Have a great week.
Have a great Monday. Bye, everyone.